All right, good morning. Welcome to Encounter Church. We're going to start off our singing songs. Love you. Please stand and join us. I waited patiently upon the Lord, and He inclined and heard my cry. He pulled me up out of the miry clay. He set my feet upon the rock. He gave me beauty for ashes and joy for my mourning, praise for heaviness. Song in my mouth, crown upon my head, He gave me life forevermore. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me, Jesus. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me, Jesus. Picked me up and He turned me around, and He placed my feet on the solid ground. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Because He picked me up and He turned me around, and He placed my feet on the solid ground. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Because He picked me up and He turned me around, and He placed my feet on the solid ground. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Because He picked me up and He turned me around, and He placed my feet on the solid ground. Hallelujah, hallelujah. So good, so good, so good to me. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me, Jesus. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me, Jesus. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me, Jesus. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me, Jesus. Got love, joy, peace, and righteousness in the Holy Spirit. Whoa, oh, 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 yeah. Whoa, oh, 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 yeah. I got love, joy, peace, and righteousness in the Holy Spirit. Whoa, oh, 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 yeah. Whoa, oh, 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 sing that out. I got love, joy, peace, and righteousness in the Holy Spirit. Whoa, oh, 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 yeah. Come on. Whoa, oh, 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 yeah. I got love, joy, peace, and righteousness in the Holy Spirit. Whoa, oh, 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 yeah. Whoa, oh, 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 yeah. I got love, joy, peace, and righteousness in the Holy Spirit. Whoa, oh, 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 yeah. Whoa, oh, 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 yeah. I got love, joy, peace, and righteousness in the Holy Spirit. Whoa, oh, 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 yeah. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me, Jesus. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me, Jesus. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me. So good, so good to me, Jesus. So good, so good to me. So good, so so, so good to me. So good, so, so good to me, Jesus.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Encounter Church. Are you doing good today? All right, look to somebody and say, I'm doing good. Hope you are. I see some of you, That's good. That's good. Now, some of you, if you didn't mean it, you got to find it deep inside of you to just say, you know what? I'm doing good. Any optimists in the room? Any optimists in the room? All right, good. Listen, I'm an optimist too. The glass is always full. It's not half full, right? It's always full. Listen, so glad that you're here at Encounter Church. We believe that today can be one of the most hopeful and helpful days that you will have. Why? Because we believe that Encounter Church is a place where people can encounter God. And we believe that today God has something very good in store for each and every single one of us. Even though sometimes life is not, the glass is full. Sometimes it's empty. If we're being real, some of us don't feel like looking to somebody and saying, I'm doing good, because sometimes we're not, right? But we believe that today God has something special in store. So whether you've been here for a while or today's your first time, we're glad that you chose to be at Encounter Church today. If you're a first-time guest, welcome. We'd love for you to get to know us as we get to know you. We'd love to know that you're here by downloading our app, encounterchurch.com/app. Hit connection card and fill it out, and we'd love to have a record of you being with us. The other thing that you could do, as you received the handout when you came in, you can fill out the connection card piece, put that in the offering basket a little bit later in the service, and that will be your gift to us today as we get to know you. We'd love for you to get to know us more. Thanks for being at Encounter Church today. We're going to sing one more song, and then Pastor Chris is going to come and continue in our series. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for being at Encounter Church. Let's continue to sing together.
Healer, awesome in power, our God. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. Come on, one more time. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. You made me sing.
Good morning. Happy Memorial Day weekend. This is awesome. It's one of those beautiful weekends where universe gives you a bonus day called Monday and makes it part of a weekend. So I hope that you've had a great weekend so far. Yesterday was beautiful. Today has been overcast, but I just think sometimes the earth wants to give you a hug, and so the clouds are the way of doing that. And so I hope that you step into that day with this. Today we're wrapping up a series that we started at the beginning of the month, pressing into questions that you have. Last week we looked at faith and questions around faith and what does it mean to be a Christian, and what does it look like to even understand the Christian faith and to step into the Christian faith. And there was a lot of good question dialogue that came out of that last week, and baptism meetings and kicking off the 112 where we're looking at what does it look like to grow. But I gave you a heads up last week. And for those who are here new today, I'll give you the heads up as well. Today what I wanted to do was talk about the other half. If last week was pressing into questions around faith, this week I wanted to press into questions around doubt. Specific doubts that we have. And actually some doubts that maybe we don't always like to verbalize, that we like to think. I have a 6-year-old little girl, and one of the things that she did when she was little, we would play peekaboo, and she would cover her eyes. And whenever she covered her eyes, I would disappear from the world. And just recently, we were playing this past weekend, and I was chasing her around, and she was trying to hide, and she had a really horrible hiding spot picked out. And I watched her go like this. And I walked up to her and I said, Ella, when you cover your eyes, I can still see you, even if you can't see me. And it was like this light bulb moment for her, like, oh, you mean just because my eyes are covered doesn't mean that you can't see me? And I kind of chuckled because here's a 6-year-old who thinks just by sticking her hands over her face that she disappears to the world and the world disappears to her. But I think sometimes we refuse to press into certain questions because of that same reason. We're afraid of the implications of the questions. We're afraid what those questions might lead to, what those questions might cause us to think about. As we do this, right? There's conversations you won't have with your spouse because you're afraid what they might say. There are questions you don't want to ask your kid because you don't want to know the answer to. And if we're being really super candid, there's questions we don't even ask ourselves because we're really afraid that we might give the answer that we don't want to hear. That questions have a power to reveal. And by choosing to not ask them, we inadvertently conceal certain things. And I think that faith, if we're going to have a faith, if we're going to talk about a faith that is powerful, that is life-changing, that is hopeful, that is helpful, then it has to be a faith that we do not have to fear asking difficult questions to or about. And I think early in, this is something that organizationally we try to live out, and this is something in our marriage with Jenny and I, and this is just something in my life. I've found it's better to charge towards the questions that we're afraid of than to run from them. And today I want to deal with a couple of questions, all intertwined in some way, shape, or form, that most of us are afraid to ask about our faith. Now, there are a lot of questions that maybe come to your mind when I say that. And unfortunately, I will not be able to answer every single question that popped up in your brain. But I can promise you this. If I don't address your question, that is why we've created Starting Point. When you walk in and there's this nice glass living room, I am there, Jason is there, our team is there every single Sunday, because if you have a question, no great, no small, no matter anywhere in between, we want to engage you with it. And so I recognize today I'm going to give this disclaimer. It's going to look different. I'm not going to answer all your questions. But what I want to do is tackle a question that I heard a lot in the midst of college, right after I started wrestling through this question around faith. And it's this simple question that, doesn't science make you wonder if there's even a God? Isn't science and faith, aren't they incompatible? Like, didn't what Charles Darwin published in the late 1800s, didn't that do away with a need for a God? Wasn't God declared dead in the half century after that declaration, when he unveiled for the watching world a theory of natural selection known as evolution? Like, didn't that get rid of God? And that even today, there is an indictment that sometimes gets said about Christians or people of faith, that they're afraid to press into the hard questions about science. They're afraid to look into something like an evolution because it might threaten their faith. And I just happen to disagree with that. I think any faith worth living out your life in should be evaluated, reflected on, and pressed into. And so, I recognize that what I'm about to do will look different than most Sundays if you've been here before. This isn't so much a message as it is a journey around ideas and thoughts. And in the end, I think we will all settle in a place with the answer to this question, or at least the answer, I think, to this question about, doesn't science make you wonder if there's even a God? To begin there, I want to kind of frame it. It's specifically, my undergrad was in biochemistry, and became a Christian halfway through college. So these were like fresh struggles for me. This was something, I remember sitting in my ecology and evolution class, and this was an active discussion. My professor really enjoyed picking on people who had faith, and so did I, because I just saw it as an incompatible thing. How does science and faith, how does rational logic deal with the invisible? And kind of the linchpin of the scientific kind of objection to faith is this thing around evolution. And let me give you just like the 30-second evolution so we're all in the same conversation. And here's the thing, maybe I'm throwing a bomb in the audience. Maybe you've never thought about this question and you're a little afraid about what I'm about to say. It's okay. I can guarantee you, your friends and your neighbors are thinking about this question. And if you happen to have kids, one day they will ask you this question. And so what I want to do today, no matter where you are, whether you're in this room or joining us online and you're not sure what you believe and you're convinced that there can't be a God because of science, or whether you're in this room and you're completely sold out to the Christian faith and you just want to ignore evolution, you just want to ignore the scientific realm because it's not relevant to your faith, that I would say for all of us, there is a tension, there is an answer in the midst of this message, and to hold on. Evolution is really two large separate kind of concepts. You have an evolution that deals primarily with micro level evolution. So that's the difference between a Chihuahua and a Rottweiler. They're both dogs, right? But there is an evolutionary difference. There is a contrast within the species. Little tiny Chihuahua, great big Rottweiler, right? I am an expression of microevolution. There are some of us who nature has prioritized as beautiful and has allowed our heads to fully shine and glow, thus removing the barrier to that shine and glow. And some of you have not evolutionarily progressed, and you still have something covering up that beautiful kind of shiny thing on top of your head called your scalp. But I've worked through some of that microevolutionary wise. And then there's also the macroevolution. And macroevolution is the theoretical concept. It's this notion that at some point in the distant past, very distant past, a collection of chemicals happened to be in the right place at the right time and catalytically sparked something that was equivalent to single-cell life. That single-cell life organism replicated and continued to replicate, and eventually that single-cell organism became a multicellular organism that became some type of aquatic animal, and that eventually transferred into land. That land animal started to grow and evolve and eventually began to branch, and then ultimately a specific branch of that branching became monkeys that ultimately became what is now Homo sapiens, or to be hyper technical, Homo sapiens sapiens, which is us. That's macroevolution, that we all started from a single point somewhere way back then, and it was an accidental convergence of a bunch of chemicals that just happened to bubble up. Most of us don't have any kind of conflict with the microevolution. Our families, gatherings reflect microevolution. But the tension for people with faith is in the macroevolution. And this was the thing oftentimes that was ridiculed in my undergrad. This was the ones when I would have conversations about faith. This was the one that oftentimes people wanted to get brought up to the surface. But here's the key. This mechanism, both of them, there's a machine underneath it. And the machine, the primary machine in evolution, is natural selection. That's the only thing I want you to get for the rest of our conversation, because this is the piece. I can't drill into everything, but I want to drill into this one thing for the sake of our conversation today. Natural selection is the process where organisms are with each successive generation, because of the pressures of the environment, tend to be better adapted for their environment. So the organisms that are stronger will replicate, and the next generation, the weakness in that species will pass away over time, and the strength will remain. Right? And this natural selection is the primary engine, it's the primary machine behind evolution. And that is what was fully expounded by Charles Darwin on his theory of natural selection. And this is the linchpin, natural selection. Now, I read a lot. I read a lot in a lot of various areas. And so this idea comes up frequently, where if you choose to take natural selection as the only mechanism for life, if it's it, there is no supernatural, there is no God, it is just natural selection, then what happens is everything has to be filtered, everything has to be explained through natural selection. The good news is if you can explain everything away via natural selection, then your argument continues to grow. Right? This is something I come across frequently where, for example, anxiety, which served us well in the plains when we would walk through, as our ancients did, and a bush would rustle, the anxiety in us, the vigilance in us would cause us to pause and consider, is it possible that in the bushes lurking might be some animal that wants to eat us? And so what would happen is, in the midst of our anxiety response and cortisol level increases, that we would be really primed to do something called fight or flight. And we could instantly respond to any threat that may be lurking and hiding in the bushes. And the idea is that even if there wasn't a lion waiting in the bushes, just us being able to be aware of it and running from it naturally selected anxiety and worry and fight and flight to be a beneficial part of humanity, which is now an issue for us that you come across in books when they're like, the body that we have that's been naturally selected towards this naturalistic evolutionary theory is that the reason we struggle with anxiety and depression today is that our bodies can't recognize the difference between an email ping, a Facebook notification, and a lion lurking in the bushes. That it all triggers a cortisol response, it all triggers an anxiety response, and that's how those things about us, those stress responses, are explained from a natural evolutionary standpoint. It's just natural selection. It's just brought in a feature that we no longer need. It's like being alive today and having a corded phone in your house. Like, it's just a carryover. But eventually it'll pass away. That's how natural selection works. But the challenge that natural selection has is it's the only source. Everything has to be explained through the realm of evolution. And this is, I think, the actual problem. This is the linchpin that I want to press into for those who are saying, doesn't faith and science not work together? Yesterday, our family, we're having kind of a family day, and my daughter on Friday had taken part in a school function where they sang patriotic songs, they waved flags, the news media was there, the long snapper for the New England Patriots came and spoke. Like, it was just this really cool moment, and so when we get in the car, we have about an hour's drive yesterday, and Ella says, I want to listen to patriotic songs, Daddy. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, I won't say it because it'll trigger it, but I asked Siri to play patriotic music, and all of a sudden it's like, bum, 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 and I look in the back seat, and it's like, bum, 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 and my daughter's got the flag, and she's like this. I mean, she's going at it, and then it's like, my country 'tis a free, sweet land of liberty. And she's like, of the icy, and then it's like, this land is your land, this land is my land. I mean, back there going at it. And I am looking at Jenny, who's sitting beside me, and I'm like, what in the world is going on in this car right now? Because, I mean, we are going from like, this land is your land to, dun, dun, dun. I mean, we're playing taps, and she's smiling and waving her flag. And there's just a point after I get over the slight annoyance of this patriotic channel that we're streaming into the car. There's a part of me that just looks, watching her smile, waving the flag, and pointing from the redwood forest to the crystal, right, whatever, and doing the hand mesh. There's just a part of me, something inside, just feels this incredible rush of love for her. And I look at Jenny and I was like, I don't know where that came from, but I'm so glad it's here. Because I don't have a box. And I'm pretty sure I would have lived my entire life without having that box had she not stepped into my world. And it was so incredibly moving. Like, the 15 minutes that followed just became this sweet, precious moment for me. Because I looked at this little human and all of her uniqueness, and I just felt profound love for her. Now, here's the challenge. If evolution, natural selection, is the reason for everything, then what I experienced yesterday in the car was an illusion. It's my brain sending chemicals to my body to make me want to protect my next offspring, because that's how my DNA continues into future generations. That if natural selection is all there is, naturalistic, evolutionary, that's it, then everything I experienced yesterday was an illusion, meant to cause me to protect her so that my DNA goes on one more generation. That's it. Which, I've never heard a love song like that. Right? I never looked at Jenny and said, girl, when you look at me, the oxytocin, it starts to flow. And then the vasopressin starts to rise, and you know where I want to go. Right? Like, that doesn't work. I don't look at her and say, the chemical alignment in your eyes with the natural light reflection off creates a very moving experience internally for me that is merely an illusion, but it makes me like the color of your retinas. Right? Like, it doesn't work. Like, nobody. And Sharon's not writing a song when he writes a song about perfect, about the DNA. He's like, I found a love for me. Well, that's an illusion, Ed. Right? She's not perfect. There's just something in you that thinks that she might be a good mix and mashup and remix of your DNA. Dancing in the dark, right? I mean, like, what? No. But all of our love songs, do you pay attention to them? What do our love songs cause us to do? They don't talk about oxytocin or vasopressin, which are the two primary hormones in our brain that drive it. They don't talk about dopamine. They don't talk about, I'm not even into the lust category. I'm just talking about the positive chemicals that you feel that you have up here that happens in those kind of love relationships. Like, songs don't talk about it. What did love songs talk about? It's like, I will go anywhere for you. I love you forever. You're my angel. Heaven is here. Right? Our love songs tend to be divine in how they speak and sing. They seem to elevate beyond some mere chemical illusion and some random bumping of electrons inside or neurons inside my mind. And it's not just in love, though I think love songs would never work if they were naturally selected oriented. It's not just that, it's the other things too. Beauty, art, music. Why? If natural selection is the only explanation, then why does our species drone towards music? Why did, when I started singing a patriotic song, something inside of you was moved? Like, think about it. Some of the highest paid people in our species are people who contribute absolutely nothing to the propagation of our species. Unless your argument is that somehow Marvin Gaye does help, let's get it on. That is it. They contribute nothing of value and significance from a naturalistic evolutionary standpoint. They just give us notes that happen to be in alignment with each other in a certain way that our brain registers as pleasant or catchy. That's an issue. Like, we don't see birds walking around with little earbirds. I just made that up. I'm copywriting it. It was awesome, right? Like, they don't walk around with little earbirds, like listening to other birds chirp. They're not like, oh, have you heard the new like tweet tweet song that the robin just put out? Like, oh, tweet tweet tweet. No, they don't do that. They don't build nests and then take pictures of that nest and put it in a museum. Like, there is none of that. Why? Because somehow naturalistic evolution does not explain our love for beauty. It does not explain our love for music. It does not explain our love for art. It would be an accident. There's no need. And yet we love those things. We're drawn to those things, and none of them could have come from natural selection alone. Take, for example, suffering. Let's just look at suffering for a second. When we talk about suffering, which is typically one of the primary objections that people have, it is a tension point for many in this conversation around faith. The injustice in the world, the lack of fairness, that we sincerely, deeply believe that people should be treated justly, that hunger should not be something that happens every single day, that we recognize that people should not be oppressed and murdered. In the 20th century, the rise of social Darwinism, so Charles Darwin's cousin helps to promote this concept that eventually becomes what we call social Darwinism, and a subset of that called eugenics. And eugenics was this idea that we should basically focus our species on replicating only the strong survive. And what would happen out of eugenics would be the systematic murder and termination of anybody and anyone that was deemed weak or inferior. Our own government sterilized people with disabilities so that they wouldn't have offspring. And that engine of eugenics was roaring really hard in our nation until another nation or two across the ocean bought hold of the idea and took it to its logical conclusion. His name was Adolf Hitler. And he would create concentration camps where the undesirables, the weak, the genetically inferior, would be led into ovens and gas chambers, and they would be systematically massacred. And between Hitler and Stalin, just those two alone, born out of this mindset, 20 million people would die in the span of 10 years. And eugenics, which was the popular idea amongst the elites, because it was the embodiment of naturalistic, evolutionary thinking, all of a sudden became unpopular when they saw what it produced. The world did not like what they saw. And yet, here is the irony. And this is going to grate and this is going to bother. But the irony is that everything eugenics propagated and all the logical arguments that Hitler and Stalin would lay out, they were born out of a naturalistic framework. Because death, destruction, hunger, the eradication of the weak to value the strong are the mechanisms of natural selection. That's how natural selection works. It's built on death, destruction, violence, and exploitation of the strong, of the weak by the strong. We call that National Geographic Channel. Isn't that what you watch when you watch a Planet Earth species show? That's what you watch. And yet, we can watch it with animals and be okay, but the moment it enters the realm, like I just mentioned, something inside of you grates at the idea. Something inside of you gets angry at the notion that two men systematically murdered 20 million people because they were seen as weak and inferior genetically. Where does that come from? When we have a problem with suffering, there is no platform to stand on with evolution. Because when we complain against suffering, we have to appeal to something higher than evolution. When we complain against the injustices in the world, when we complain against the systematic massacre of people because they're genetically inferior, as defined by whatever the camp happens to be, we have to appeal to something greater than natural selection. And I think it's what you see in Ecclesiastes 3:11. When Solomon, who in a dark moment of his life, with all the wisdom that wisdom brings, but yet completely detached from all spiritual things, he writes these words: He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. What Solomon is writing there, what he's capturing in that succinct statement, is that when you look at the world, it is too beautiful, tantalizing, mesmerizing, too vast and too large to experience it all. The world, it's too big to see. You and I cannot travel to all the incredible views that it has. We cannot eat all the incredible food it has. We cannot experience all the various cultures that this globe contains. And yet, simultaneously, in the midst of our inability to experience the bigness of this world, there is a contrast inside of our hearts that Solomon points to here when he says that when in the midst of all of this world and its vastness and our inability to experience it, it's still in its satisfactions way too small. That we recognize that there's something that cries out for more than just this world. There's something that hungers and longs for something than just passing on our DNA to the next generation. We desire love and purpose. We desire joy and peace. Things that natural selection cannot produce and have never been able to supply. We desire justice and fairness. And yet none of those things are capable in the natural realm. And what does Solomon do? Solomon, quoting C.S. Lewis in a very kind of nuanced way, says, if you find yourself with a desire that nothing in the world can seem to satisfy, the most logical explanation is that you were created for another world. And this is what Solomon means when he says that he's put eternity in the hearts of every human. That there is something divine that has been stamped into our soul, that in the natural world there is almost something super and above called the supernatural. And it's that supernatural that we appeal to every time we watch racial injustice and we find ourselves in anger saying that is wrong. It's that supernatural aspect that we appeal to when we see kids being starved or murdered in schools. We rise up internally knowing it's wrong. That does not come from evolution in the natural realm. It comes from being rooted and stamped and formed out of the supernatural realm. Because natural selection cannot answer, it cannot address, it cannot explain all the cries of the human heart. Because ultimately, we are not just merely natural beings, we are supernatural beings too. And that for me, that question, that tension, that light bulb began to happen. That recognition that natural does not answer everything happened to me in college. In the middle of my sophomore and junior year, I got a job as a bank teller. I'd float around filling in for people who were on vacation. And so naturally, I was going to towns and communities where a vast majority of the people were already on vacation anyway. So I would sit 6 or 7 hours a day in a bank. I would have little surges of activity, but it was usually 6 hours a day. I would just sit there. I didn't know anyone because I had only come in for a day or two. So I started reading a ton. Now, I am a nerd. Some of you have picked up on that. I'm about to fully reveal my nerd cards. Okay? What I read that summer, sometime in certain weeks, it would be a book a day, was in the realm of theoretical physics and cosmology. And cosmology specifically presses into the origins of the universe. I told you I was a nerd, okay? I really enjoy that. Physics, I like it. Science journals, I still read them. I still keep up with that stuff. I love it. And so I was reading a ton of these theoretical physics books in cosmology, and the thing that I kept bumping up against was this notion that at that point had become the defining notion in cosmology, the standard model, in fact, of our universe's origin. It was called the Big Bang. I want to give you a picture, because this is the picture of the one piece of evidence that revolutionized the whole cosmology circuit. And I know that most of you, let's just be real, do not care about cosmology. But this is interesting, because this picture is the linchpin. It is the foundation for the Big Bang. The standard model that at some point in a very distant past, there was nothing and something rapidly expanded and formed called the universe. And this image that comes from a probe that flies above our planet that detects kind of subtle variations in microwave temperature fluctuations, produced this image after about 10 years in its final form. And this is called YMAP, and this is a snapshot of what's called the cosmic background radiation. And what you're looking at is the echo of the Big Bang. And I remember processing, reading through all this stuff that I won't get into. And this is the idea that kept bumping up against me. It was like I understood the what and the how, but I was haunted by the why and the who. Right? If there was a bang, you want to know what caused the bang, but eventually you want to know who caused it or why did it happen. Right? If something explodes in my house today, you better believe that I want to know why it happened so I can prevent it again. So this question around why naturally bubbles up. And it started bubbling up for me in the summer between my sophomore and junior year, and I wanted to know why. Nothing ever comes from nothing. How does a something bubble up out of nowhere? And yet that's the physical world we're living in, came out of nothing. It doesn't make sense. And what I eventually had to recognize was that while science was a gift to me, and while it was a passion for me, and it was a discipline I enjoyed, science could answer what and how, but science was not capable of addressing the why or the who. It goes beyond the discipline of science. And eventually what happened in the aftermath of me starting to wrestle with those deeper fundamental questions, questions that most scientists in the realm of cosmology are haunted by. Because you can study the Big Bang all day, but when you ask the simple question around why the Big Bang, who the Big Bang, you start to bump up against this burning question that maybe there's something more than just the natural realm around us. And that while science does not definitively prove, and everything I've just walked through, does not address the answer of, is Christianity right? That's a separate question. That was the journey that I went on after this first piece. I think what science ultimately does is it leaves us wanting to the darker, bigger, heavier questions around who, what, and why we're here. And that those bigger questions that natural evidence, natural reason cannot address, because ultimately we were created for not just a natural realm, but for a supernatural one too. That science has helped me deepen my faith, not destroy it. Because what it eventually gave me was an appreciation for the blueprints of the universe, which helped me to further appreciate the architect of the universe. And then that's what science gave me. Psalm 19:1 says this. It says that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Voyager and Juno are two different spacecrafts who, Voyager in the late 70s, early 80s, zoomed through the solar system, and then Juno in the last year, both ended up passing Jupiter. In fact, the big picture, the colossal image that we have of Jupiter that's super famous, that everyone knows, that with the big red spot, that image of Jupiter was from Voyager, flying around Jupiter. I have a picture of it I want you to see. This is a shot of just Jupiter that came from Voyager. We had never had a picture like that prior to Voyager spacecraft flying by it. And all of a sudden, the majesty of a planet with the vastness of what it is that can handle thousands of Earths tucked inside, that sits, this great ball of gas that sits right in the middle of our solar system. Voyager began to send those pictures back. And then last year, Juno did a flyby and began to snap pictures, and still those pictures are being processed. And Juno sent back even more compelling pictures of even tighter shots like this one. Isn't that incredible? That's a tight shot. That's like Jupiter's selfie. Like, that's incredible. And the swirls of the gases and the great red spot and all the beauty and the majesty of that planet. That when the psalmist, without ever seeing that image, all he had was the heavens before him, he wrote the words that the heavens declare the glory. Right? That he pens, the skies proclaim the works of his hand. That I think when we talk about the YMAP picture, ultimately what I saw in that was the echo of God's voice, not just the echo of the Big Bang. And that science does not have to leave you wondering if there's a God. I think what science ultimately can do is leave you in a place of wonder before God, in awe of the works of his hands and the masterpiece of his mind that we call the universe. Let's pray. God, thank you for these words found in Psalm that speak to the majesty of who you are and what you've done. Thank you for the images and the snapshots that we see. And we know that there are far greater images, there are far greater works that as a species we have yet to even begin to see. Because while we measure the universe in light years, you measure it with your hands. And while we measure time in billions of years, you see it as mere days. And so may you foster in us wonder and awe and a recognition of the greatness of who you are. And it's in your name, Jesus, that I pray. Amen. So thanks for holding on with me. I recognize, like I said at the beginning, today was different. It was less sermon and more conversational walkthrough. Some of you, your brains may be bleeding, and it's okay. We've got Band-Aids. Some of you, I stirred up more questions than I answered. That's okay too. We've got more answers. And so if I would love to connect with you at Starting Point after the service today. I'd love to buy you a book, take you to coffee, and talk through it. There's so much more out there that makes a compelling case for faith. That you don't have to wonder if there's a God. I really sincerely believe that you can wonder at God. And so we're going to wrap up today with a little bit of that wonder. That we close up every single week at Encounter Church with a song, and it's just to give us a little bit of breathing room, to take a step back, to breathe and to process those deeper thoughts and the implications for our life. And in the midst of this series, we wanted to wrap up with a song that would cause our heart and our mind to think bigger and broader and grander than just our own lives. So we're going to sing a song that we introduced at the beginning of this month, a song that talks about the majesty of creation. And while we're singing that song, or while you're reading that song, maybe for the first time, you'll see people moving around the room because you're in the midst of generous people. We believe a church should be known for what they do for the community, not what they take from it. We believe a church should step and move and walk in the act of love that Jesus demonstrated on the cross. And so out of that, we do generous things. Next month, we're opening up this building and turning it into a movie theater just to create a fun family moment for our community. And that we were able to do all of those things because of the generosity of the people. And so we carve out this time to do that. Maybe you're like my family, you've already given this week through the app or through the website. But we recognize that for some of us, we set aside this day to do it. And so just wanted to give you a heads up if you're new here. That's why there'll be people moving around with baskets. But those baskets can be for you if as Jason referenced earlier, a time for your connection card, prayer requests. We would love to connect with you. So I want to invite you to stand. And before I leave, I want to say one more thing. I read Psalm 19:1, but Psalm 19:2 is interesting as well. It says that day after day, they, being the heavens and the skies, they pour forth speech. And night after night, they reveal knowledge. What's incredible about Voyager and Juno when they passed in front of Jupiter, right? And that glorious shot that we had up a while ago of the red spot, the selfie, that when they passed over this, the probe and the sensors didn't just take incredible shots. They were also evaluating what was going on inside the atmosphere. And one of the things they detected that happens very regularly on Jupiter, at 100 times brighter than it happens on Earth, is lightning. And out of those probes came this sound. This sound is the sound of lightning on Jupiter. That is what lightning sounds like in the midst of that. And in the midst of all of that, there is another aspect, the sound that's starting to play even now in the next few seconds. A sound that sounds really familiar for you. If you've ever turned on a television, if you've ever turned on a radio and you've heard this, static. Did you know every time you turn on a television or a radio and you get static, what you're detecting is the actual movement of that background image of the universe. That Y-map image I showed you, that green actually has a sound attached to it. That sound is the echo of God's voice. That sound, the cosmic background radiation that creeps into our television, to our radio as the sound of silence, that sound starts to overlap. And if we could tune our hearts to the channel of the frequencies all around us, what we would notice is that all the heavens declare, not just their voices, that they come together as a song that they sing and declare and point to a deeper knowledge of a greater majesty, of one bigger than all that we could ever imagine, one more magnificent, whose mind can create planets, whose mind can speak stars into existence, who thought you up, who formed you, fashioned you, who loved you, who knew you. That is what the heavens declare, even now, all around us. If we tune our heart, you can hear the song that we will sing to you now.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. No point of reference, you spoke to the dark, flushed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. The stars were made to worship, so alive. I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. Creation sings your praise. your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. The wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of our praise still falls short, then we'll sing again 100 billion You chase down my heart for all of my feelings. On the hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in your word, the Lord calls a love. If you gladly show surrender, so will I. See your heart in million different ways. Every precious one, a child died. If you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
Thanks so much for being here at Encounter Church today. We really hope the message today was both helpful and hopeful for you, and that last song was just a moment of encouragement and an uplifting moment for you as you step out into your week. A couple things to note, though, before you head out the door today. The first being, if you're new here or if you're looking to get more involved at Encounter, we'd love for you to stop by Starting Point on your way out. It's the room with the 2 glass doors right by the main entrance, and there are people there that would love to talk to you and answer any questions that you may have. Secondly, if you've been here for a few weeks, you've probably heard us talking about the 112 class. And the 112 is just a class designed to help you discover a version of your faith that's meaningful, that's deep, that's connected, that's transformative. And so this week is actually the last week you can sign up for it. It kicked off last week. We've got close to 25 people signed up, and week 1 was awesome. I'm in the class myself, and I was just so encouraged leaving there because it's really designed to help us discover how to take what we experience here on Sundays and then to experience it out in the rest of our week. So if you're interested in signing up, you can do so today. On your way out of here, just stop by room 102. The first half hour of the class is just lunch. So feel free to go ahead over there and just jump in there. And lastly, if you want to join the class but you weren't planning on this prior to today, and you have a car full of kids you got to get home or anything like that, you can do that. The actual class content does not start till 12:15. So you have time to go home, drop people off, and then come back for 12:15. So we'd love to have you be part of that, and we'll see you next week. Have a great Memorial Day.